Good day, everyone. My name is Brilliant. I'm from an organization called Africa Unite, and it's a human rights and youth empowerment organization situated in Cape Town. The organization was started in 2001, and part of the work that we do is to capacitate young people, train young people on human rights, and what we expect them after we train is for them to go in their own communities and advocate for various human rights violations that they see, and making sure that also they fight for the rights of vulnerable people. One of the things that also we support our young people with is trying to push for policy change. And so part of the work that we do every day is supporting young people that are being active in their own communities. So the whole idea behind this is that you cannot really understand the work that we do if you do not understand the context of South Africa. South Africa is just 24 years after they got their independence, and it is very important to know that the apartheid system, in as much as it was abolished, you can still see a lot of reminiscences of the apartheid whole design. If you come into the city like Cape Town, for example, you will see that people live in racial groups mostly, or still divided within the racial groups, even though you might find some sections that are mixed, but there is what we commonly know as white areas, black areas, and colored areas. And the majority of South Africans being black people, it also shocks to realize that it's the majority of people that are still in abject poverty. So the work that we do is try and empower, especially young people, because if you look at the continent's biggest population in Africa is young people, even in South Africa itself. But young people are facing most of these challenges. And in what we call black communities or colored communities here, that's where you see a lot of violence. Violence not only in terms of physical violence, but there's a lot of structural violence also from the government itself. So the programs that we have designed is to try and empower young people, empower communities to stand up for themselves, and realize that the process of transformation, waiting for the government to really transform everything to be equal, is going to take time, and it might need them to stand up on their own and start advocating for many things to change. Because if these things don't change, the inequality will still continue. I mean, Cape Town is regarded as one of the most unequal cities in the world, and it was designed during the apartheid, and you see that it's still happening up until today. There are many things that you can see that inequality still exists. Hence, it is very important for you to understand this background, because it is, like I said, the whole idea of how the apartheid system has created spaces that are very violent, and how it still uses some structures are still violent itself. And one of the key structure which is still a lot of violence in itself is the education system. Yeah, so looking into my experience as a youth coordinator at Africa Unite, I've been a youth coordinator since 2014, and before that, I became a youth coordinator in Africa Unite, I'm originally from Zimbabwe anyway, and I moved in Cape Town 4 to 5 years back. And when I finished my university, because I'm a social anthropologist by profession, before I moved to Cape Town, I taught a little bit in high school in my country. And when I came to Cape Town, one of the first volunteer work that I did, because Cape Town is a lot of African and migrants and refugees that are coming from different parts of Africa. You have got your economic migrants that are seeking more opportunities because of atrocities that are happening in Africa. You've got a lot of refugees that are coming in, and most of these refugees and migrants, they are going to stay in what we call the black townships, because most of them, they're coming from black African countries. And what really shocked me is that when I started my first job, like my first volunteer work was to be a teacher, and I was teaching young kids from primary school, and it shocked me because it is the content that I saw It is the curriculum that I saw, and it was the level of knowledge that the kids had, which I was shocked to say it was very low. And it made me want to understand more, like, why is it like this? Why is it things are so different from my country? And it's not like my country really has a special education system, but I realized that something is really wrong when it comes to the curriculum itself. Yeah, and it made me to want to dig deeper. And that's when I joined Africa Unite, just for the whole idea of trying to push policy change and transformation. And I saw that the problem was way too deep. The teachers in township schools, the majority of the teachers are black themselves. They went through an education system that was called the Bantu education system, which was introduced during apartheid. This form of education was created to include and exclude other people. So Bantu education was designed just to make you ready to work for a boss in the industry. It was not meant to empower you. So there was not a lot of emphasis on even subjects like maths, science, even the resources in the schools. They were very poor, no laboratories, no libraries, no books sometimes. So the government has not changed that much. And the people who are suffering from all the setup is mostly the black communities, because what you see, the violence that is in those communities, every day someone dies, and there's a lot of gun violence and all that. And what you see happening now is that what happens in the school is exactly what happens in the communities, exactly what happens in the school. And most of the whole structure of the Bantu education system of apartheid has not changed. And what you see is learners or students that are not really interested in the curriculum because it does not speak to them. The curriculum is very Eurocentric than Afrocentric, and it has affected a lot of learners themselves, because they can't even, the teachers themselves, sometimes they are not even aware of some of these principles, some of this, it can be even topics. If I can give an example of a study that was done in 2014, where mathematics teachers that teach in high school in a province called KwaZulu-Natal, 253 of them, they were made to write the same examination that the learners are writing, and 57% of them managed to pass with average marks, and a quarter of them failed, meaning that something is very wrong. The education system and the curriculum itself is very violent, that it is not really speaking to the learners themselves, and there's not even enough resources to equip the learners to learn about that, to learn more of the curriculum itself. And the level of knowledge of Africa in many in many townships or black communities in South Africa is very shocking, because even when you come from a different African country, some of them don't even know about where that country is in Africa, because what they learn in school is more of European and American history. So there's a huge gap when it comes to connecting the African knowledge and indigenous knowledge systems because of the impact of the modern knowledge system. How I knew Thais is that when she came late last year, when she came to South Africa to conduct her research, she knew, or her supervisor, her professor, knew one of the professors from America who's working here in South Africa at an organization called Human Science Research Council. And she linked Thais to that professor, and that professor happens to be one of our partner in the work that we do every day. And because we have a program that focuses on building the capacities of learners in black townships, building activism amongst learners in black townships. So he was interested in us meeting as an organization, meeting Thais and explaining to her the challenges in the education system. So that is how we met, and we also realized that there's a lot of connections when it comes to books and all. And that's when she also spoke about the whole idea of the Transatlantic Book Club, which really caught my eye, because there's a lot of similarities in the whole objectives of this project. First of all, we realized that many African Americans and black South Africans here, one of the biggest challenges, especially in the townships, is find that it's more of an imposed curriculum that they are learning about. A curriculum which really does not connect to their daily lives. A curriculum that really teaches you that anything indigenous or anything African is not really embraced, but you need to appreciate more something that is more foreign or Western. And we also realize that there's just the general violence and lack of identity, especially within the schools themselves. Because, for example, the schools here in Cape Town, if they're in the black township, all the black townships are very violent. There's a lot of violence. You find that the same violence you see in the community is the same violence you see in the school. Teachers are stabbed, teachers are killed. And one of the things that you realize, which is quite a factor, is the whole idea that the education system that they get does not really empower them enough to break the concrete ceiling, because they can't compete enough with the learners that are in the white areas, or what we call the privileged areas. So there was a lot of connections that we shared, and for me it's quite very interesting that we are about to start a program or project that can be able to connect the struggles that we see on an everyday basis. We can able to build consciousness, because one of the biggest disadvantages is that indigenous knowledge systems are not really documented. That's why it's easy for modern knowledge systems to penetrate, and that's why it's even easy for the curriculum that the learners are having now to be able to look as, or to be able to present itself as the reality compared to your own original identity. Yeah. One fundamental aspect of this whole transatlantic book club project for me is that if you look already in South Africa, there's a movement that started a few years ago, I think 3 to 4 years ago. It's called The Fees Must Fall. And looking at The Fees Must Fall itself, the learners were calling for free education in universities, and later on they changed it to free decolonized education, which makes sense. But for me, it does not make a lot of sense if you want to decolonize tertiary education before you decolonize the lower part, or the lower education, that is high school and primary school. Because that's the biggest challenge that South Africa is facing now, that the curriculum that is taught in underprivileged communities does not emphasize on, and mostly underprivileged communities, like I said, these are black townships or so-called colored townships. And if decolonizing education, the whole project of decolonizing education starts on a lower level, then we can see changes, and we can see young people being interested. We can see many black kids prospering and being able to express themselves, which is a big challenge currently, especially in the black townships. And there's a lot of literature that can support this. Books written by one of my favorite icons in South Africa, Steve Biko. Books written by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He has a very beautiful book, he's from Kenya, called Decolonization of the Mind. And also books written by one of this lady from Zimbabwe called Tsinsidanga Rembwa. She has a very good book known as Nervous Conditions. So these are some of the books that can be used to exchange the knowledge, because what is lacking at the moment is knowledge itself. If I tell you that schools in South Africa, they learn more about European and American history more than they learn about Africa. That's why you see that in South Africa there's what we call xenophobic violence. Violence that is directed to black migrants and refugees. And some of the researchers, they call this black on black violence, because most migrants and refugees, they settle in these places called townships, which are mostly black communities. And when they go there, there's competition for resources, because the government itself does not deliver enough. And the education system there does not really empower many black South Africans to be prosperous. So when many migrants and refugees settle in there, it can create competition. And we have seen that migrants have been killed, migrants have been burnt. So it's very unique. We understand that xenophobia can be a general phenomenon across the world. But in South Africa, it comes now with killing, and it's black on black. And it's also because there's no teaching of African history. Many young South Africans in the black townships will tell you that they don't know where Somalia is in Africa. They don't know what is happening in DRC, that there's a civil war. They don't even know. So this whole idea of the Transatlantic Book Club will transform and will generate more knowledge on Africanness and the blackness. But it can also be a challenge also because the learners here in general, the black community does not have access to internet or even a mobile phone, which can be a challenge. And also the culture of reading is not emphasized. People don't really like reading for knowledge. People read to pass the curriculum because going to school is also very tiresome. People don't connect with the curriculum, so they just read to pass. So I think that can be the challenge in terms of connecting or initiating the program. But for me, this is the ideal program that can be used to start having a sense of identity and embracing indigenous knowledge systems. And I think it is also very much in line with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because in as much as we understand the principles of human rights, they are indivisible, inalienable, interdependent, and universal, meaning that if we say everyone has the right to education, even the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals themselves, they further go on to say everyone should have the right to access to quality education. And what we are seeing today in South Africa, especially in the black townships, is not quality education. It's education that was borrowed during the apartheid system, what they call Bantu education, which is still up to now not been resolved. And that's why we still see a lot of inequality. That's why we still say that Cape Town is one of the most unequal cities in the world. Thank you.